This is how incredibly detailed these folks are. I have to admit, I'm one of them. One woman pointed out, she said, well, that's a mistake. She doesn't have a mother. She said, however, Conan Doyle made the same mistake with her and her relative in this story. So actually, Conan Doyle himself did some inconsistencies and mistakes, we would call them, in terms of his own stories. All I can say is I do my very best. I'm very embarrassed about that one mistake because that was egregious in my opinion. But mostly I'm pretty darn accurate, and I'm a member of a number of Sherlockian organizations. I'm in the BSI, which is Baker Street Irregulars in the U.S., and I'm also in the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. And when I'm in L.A., I run a group called the Sherlock Holmes Breakfast Club, and I'm a member of a bunch of these groups. I really do care. I really do try to make them accurate as I can. But I'm human, and so is Conan Doyle, so you just have to do your best.
In Devil's Due, when this book opens up, there is a story in the newspaper about Sherlock. The storyline, was that kind of a nod to fake news of our era?
Yes, it definitely was. It definitely was. When I sat down to write The Devil's Due, I was very distracted, frankly, and enraged by the news. I knew that I didn't want to write a polemic about this. In doing my research, one of the things I do is I decide on what year the story takes place, then I start reading newspapers of the time and familiarize myself with the news of that day. And also what I just generally know about Victorian London, which is a fair amount. That really was going on. The yellow journalism was rampant. So, there was full of gossip and BS in the papers. People have always been people. They like to create scandal. They like to throw kerosene on the flames. They like to bring down the high and mighty. It's really the same old stuff. People love to report tragedy. They love to be, I don't know how to pronounce it, schadenfreude or something. Yeah, so that people love to titillate with drama and, foment unrest, and then they feel powerful doing that. So that's always been going on. So you asked me, I think in the questions you gave me, whether, I was creating something with having Holmes be called the devil. But actually in canon, I think at one point he's like, what is this, black magic? To people who don't understand his methods, scientific methods, and they don't see what he's observing, that he appears to be pulling facts out of the air like magic. And he also is described as he's really tall, he's really thin, he's very pale. He's kind of a weird looking dude. I picture him as a handsome, weird-looking dude, but that's in my head. But in other words, he is a little unusual, and he has an unusual manner about him. He's hyper and he's focused, and he's got this hawk-like nose and he's cheekbones. He's very intense.
Jeremy Brett.
Yeah, Jeremy Brett is the closest to look and feel to what was described in the canon, definitely. And also he's handsome. He is kind of a good image of that. So Holmes, I could really imagine this happening. People are demonized. They were then and they are now. That's just human nature, unfortunately.
In the books, Inspector Lestrade is always very pro-police. And in this book, he kind of works with Sherlock and sort of against the police in part of it. I can see why.
In the originals, Lestrade is initially, doubtful of Holmes, just as all the police are. They just see him as a kind of egotistical meddler, which he kind of is. But over time, Lestrade starts to really realize how incredibly good and how helpful he is. He turns some of the case to Holmes. Actually, he does both things in the original canon. In this one, I think he's very justified because at that particular moment in time of this story, in my book, The Devil's Due, there's a despot who is in control of the police for a brief period of time. He's horrified at this man and what he's trying to change the police into. It makes perfect sense that he would want to help Holmes. Besides being a despot, the guy is also kind of glossing over some crimes just because he wants them solved so he looks good. Lestrade is the straight and narrow. He's a real policeman. He wants the crime solved within his character to do what he does here.
I have a brother that would be very upset with me if I did not ask you about the role you played in one of his favorite movies, TRON. What led you to this contribution to modern movie history, and did that lend a hand in preparing you for writing mysteries?
I've loved computers since I was a little kid, which is before personal computing. I had a little bit of programming as a little kid in a special class once. We did programming on paper. But then in university, I took computer programming from one of the greats, a man named Donald Knuth at Stanford, and I loved it. I just loved the incredible complexity and the logic. I just loved it. And so I think that's kind of Holmesian Sherlockian. I mean, I've always had that sort of, it's interesting because computer programming is not unlike constructing a mystery, actually. So I was interested in computers. I tried to get computers used at Universal Studios for 4 years in story development. I tried to get them to use computers to catalog all the story submissions, and they thought, oh, it's going to take away our freedom and our creativity. It's like, no, it's a library system. It's just a cataloging system. I was always interested, and then I met Steven Lisberger, and he had this animated glowing figure that he called TRON, and he had the notion of putting this character as a video game warrior into a machine, and that's the extent of his idea. And I said, well, you need a story. You need characters in a story. I came up with the notion of having a real life person fall in some way into the computer and interact with this Tron character. And it becomes kind of a Wizard of Oz story. How do you get back home? And there's trouble in that land. And I created the storyline for that. But originally, I haven't mentioned this yet in this interview, but one of the features of Arthur Conan Doyle that I most love is his sense of humor. I love humor, and all my things I've ever written have been comedic to some degree. I wrote Tron, the first draft of Tron, for Robin Williams as the character who would fall inside. At that point, he wasn't known yet. I'd seen him perform on Sunset Boulevard in a tiny little place, was scouting for Universal. So I had him in my head when I was writing Tron, and it was quite funny. And then also, I went to Xerox PARC, and that is where the personal computer was invented. You probably have heard of it. There's a bunch of books about it. It's where Steve Jobs visited, and then quite a few of the things that they were doing there were taken in and eventually became the Mac. Anyway, the head of that program was Alan Kay, and I met him and interviewed him and wrote him into the movie. The Alan Bradley character is Alan. And then later, Alan and I got married. And we're still married. He's in the next room.
Your co-star, huh?
Yeah, he's still my hero. So I've just been really interested in computers. What's weird is, I mean, that's very Sherlockian in a way. I think Holmes would have, if he were functioning today, he would enjoy programming.
Oh, I think so too. I've thought about that quite a bit.
The books were short stories.
Yes.
How did you make your story into a long book?
That is a good question because, and some people say, oh, they really should just be short stories. Once you try to write one of those as a book, you have to bend some of the rules or some of the choices that Conan Doyle made. You have to change some of those. And so I really thought long and hard about this. There are precedents for good Holmes books, and I'd read The 7% Solution by Nick Meyer in the 70s. In fact, I was at Universal when that movie was made. So there were precedents, but I began to think, like, what is it that you do? What's different about a short story and a novel? And there's several things. One is I feel like novels need a theme. Even a genre novel, let's say an adventure, a mystery, something like that, it needs some kind of other meaning other than, hey, let's solve the crime. So in my first book in the series, which is Art in the Blood, I got very interested in the question of what are the perils and the gifts of being an artist? Because Holmes is clearly an artist. In fact, that's threaded all through canon. He referred to, he says, the most famous one is Art in the Blood is liable to take the strangest forms. And he says that to Watson when Watson is saying, how is it that you and your brother both have these incredible brains and can see things like this? And he said, well, his grandmother was a sister of the artist Vernet. So anyway, who was a real person. So the notion of what is it that an artist has that Holmes can use? And it's the ability to make pattern out of chaos, to pull the pattern out of chaos. It's the ability to note details and which are the salient details in all the big mess of them. It's also just sort of the creativity to make connections where there aren't any obvious connections. There's lots of ways in which Holmes is an artist. But by the same token, to call somebody artistic, even now, but certainly in the Victorian era, meant flaky. It meant emotional. Sometimes it had the connotation of gay, but not always. But basically it meant you were kind of a slightly fragile, emotional, person if you were called artistic. Holmes is a bit fragile in a certain way. And that's where Watson's friendship is so critical. Kind of pulls his friend back from the edge. That manifests, of course, in the original stories, his cocaine addiction. But it's also his bipolar. I mean, he seems to basically crash when he's not working and get dangerously inactive and depressed. So this kind of bipolar temperament is a feature of an artistic person. There's a great book about that, by the way, called Touched by Fire by Kay Redfield Jamison. And she's bipolar herself, and she's a neuroscientist, and she talks about the artistic temperament and bipolar and how bipolar feeds creativity. In this area of the subject area, I thought, oh, there's something really interesting here, what I could do with Holmes without belaboring it, without stopping the adventure story or, veering off into psychoanalysis, which wouldn't be Doyle-like. I thought that it needs this underpinning. So that's the first thing is theme. The second book, Unquiet Spirits, the theme was ghosts of our past will come to haunt us if we don't deal with them. So it has to do with Holmes has a ghost in his past, but it also has to do with people who believe in ghosts and other manifestations of the word ghost. So anyway, the thing is having some kind of slightly larger theme surrounding the mystery is a good thing. Second thing to do, I think, to make mystery adventure into a full-length book is kind of having to do with the structure. And here's where my screenwriting and I'm a story editor also, screenwriting and story editing work came into play. Like a short story has a structure like a Japanese bridge, over a little stream, just one of those little round half moons. But a novel is more like a suspension bridge over a wide river and has different pylons in order to keep it up for the whole length that it needs to be. Similarly, a novel-length story needs these support places, and those, in terms of storytelling, are big emotional turning points, are big action turning points. In a given novel, you need more of those than you do in a short story. Structuring those in was actually a conscious decision as a writer. There was that. Those are the two main reasons, the adding theme and making the structure work like that are the two ways that I intellectually thought about before I started turning this into a novel.
I have to say, I have devoured all of Holmes and Watson's short stories and novels. I think you did an excellent job. I loved every minute of it. I am so happy that I discovered that this was brought to our attention.
Now we're going to go back and read the first two.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, can you tell us a little bit about the fourth book?
Sure. I'm working on it right now. It's called The Three Locks. It has to do with why we lock things away, to hide them, to protect them, to keep other people out. It takes place this time in London and in Cambridge, and it involves an escape artist magician, and it involves a kind of runaway rebel daughter of a famous Cambridge don, and also Watson has received a little box which pertains to something from his childhood that will solve a mystery, but he can't get the thing open. There's no lock. So there's several locks involved here, and then there's kind of like three typically melded together, three stories trying to connect them in like a triple helix to blend them a bit. So those are the three.
When do you plan on that coming out?
When I'm done, I don't know. I don't know. They were hoping for this fall. But each one of these books has taken me 2 years to write because I researched them copiously. I mean, I've been to Cambridge once. I have to go back again. Then I visited the Historical Locks Museum. I really kind of go all out with the research on these things. In the first one, Art in the Blood, I actually found where Toulouse-Lautrec lived at exactly that month and year. And I went to that place and I walked there from where the Chat Noir nightclub was. I walked that path, and I then looked at antique maps to see if the names of the streets had changed, and I basically, had them running in that path. My things are really ridiculously researched, so they take a long time, and also to structure them, it's just not trivial, so it takes me a while.
Well, do you have any other books or events you'd like our listeners to know about?
Yeah, sure. There's a Gladstone's Library. I don't have the date, but if you look up the Detection Club, that's a group in London. They're having a conference at Gladstone's Library coming up fairly soon. I'm going to give a talk. And then I'm also going to be at Capital Crime in the fall. I will be traveling less, unfortunately, this year, partly from the coronavirus, I think.
Right.
But I'm hoping there may be some other. I usually go to BoucherCon every fall, so we'll see how that goes. Part of the reason I'm not traveling so much right now is I'm really trying to get this third book done. They would love to have a book a year. I don't know if that's possible. I'm going to try.
Do you have a set amount of books for this, or are you just in perpetuity?
Well,
hopefully.
Initially, they bought one, and then they extended it to 3 after the third one, which is The Devil's Due. First is Art the Blood, then Unquiet Spirits, then The Devil's Due. And after The Devil's Due, they gave me 2 more. So this is the first of those 2. So there'll be at least 1 more after this.
Oh, nice. Very exciting.
Very good. Well, Bonnie, thank you so much for talking with us.
My pleasure.
A pleasure to meet you, and we love this book.
Good. I'm so glad.
just great from start to finish.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. You know, we work in a vacuum, so it's really a pleasure to hear that somebody loves it.
It was great.
We're a member of a book club at our local library, and we are going to definitely suggest this one for an up-and-coming book for that club.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I've sometimes appeared on Skype to book clubs. I've done that before.
I'll have to let them know that.
Well,
you enjoy your evening, and please, when the next one comes out, please let us know. We'd love to have you back on.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bonnie. Bye-bye.
By the way, you didn't ask about the scenery here, but I thought I would.
We were looking at that. I love the mantelpiece with the skull.
What is the thing hanging?
That is the Persian slipper that